like the idea that a voice can just go somewhere
uninvited, like a dirty thought in a nice clean mind.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jay. This is the Liberal Lens, and we're here because the New York Times just dropped a bombshell, in-depth report about Donald Trump and his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, how it goes much deeper than people think, and how all the denial from the White House and the Trump administration about how him and Jeffrey weren't friends, they barely knew each other, was a lie, which we already knew. But now the New York Times exposed them and they dug deep into this report. So check this out.
Today, new reporting from the New York Times reveals never-before-seen details about the relationship between President Trump and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The deeply sourced story details just how close Epstein and Trump were and what brought them together. It's in direct contrast to a Trump lawyer's claims that the future president and Epstein did not socialize together and were never really friends. Joining me now, the man behind that story, New York Times political and investigative reporter Nicholas Confessore. Nick, I want you to take us inside this reporting. How close were they really?
I think they were as close as any other friends that they had. And I think that Jeffrey Epstein thought he was Donald Trump's closest friend for a period. They spent a lot of time talking on the phone about women and sexual conquests. They spent time at Trump Tower or over at Jeffrey Epstein's offices nearby on Madison Avenue. They flew on each other's planes, and they partied together a lot. At a lot of parties with women, people who are younger than they are. And I think what brought them together was women and sexual conquest.
You actually spoke to a former assistant of Epstein's, and I thought, well, how do we know all of this? Because you get into some pretty specific details. He actually let assistants listen in on the phone calls with Donald Trump?
Yeah, it was a power play. So we spoke to several former assistants and employees of Jeffrey Epstein's, and he had a habit of putting Donald Trump and other famous friends on the phone. It was partly a power play and partly a way that he groomed people. See how powerful I am. I can put this person on the phone. I can get them on the phone. I can put them on speaker. We're friends. That's how powerful I am. It was a way that he groomed people. And he would put Donald Trump on the phone. They would talk about sex.
In response to your question, the White House called it a fake story, which is not worth the paper it's printed on, just another stale regurgitation of decades-old false allegations.
Well, look, based on our interviews and a scouring of court records and other sources, at least 6 people who have accused Maxwell and Epstein of grooming and abuse were at some point introduced to Trump through them. And one of them was a minor. And you can read her story in public court records. She said that she was brought to Mar-a-Lago by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14 and introduced and said, and Epstein kind of nudged Donald Trump and said, this is a nice one, right? Something like that. So I don't know. I think the reader has to judge if 2 grown men are staying there with a 14-year-old, right? What message can you take from that? What should the men have assumed was happening? And that's a question for Trump to answer. He didn't want to answer any of our questions specifically. We got one blanket statement for a long list of questions. And we'll see if he ever answers those questions.
All right, there you have it. From the man himself who wrote the article for New York Times. But let's go through a few things quick. Besides this, there's 6 women who claim to have been given to Trump from Epstein. One of them being a 14-year-old girl, which, are we now surprised what Meg Kelly did when she came out and tried to normalize men being with 15-year-old girls when she was like, it's not like they were 4, it's not like they were 6 or whatever ages she picked. And she was like, they were 15. This is what we were talking about in the previous video. They're literally trying to normalize grown-ass men being with 14 and 15-year-old girls. And it's because Meg Kelly knew this story was out there. So already running defense for Trump. And what people think it's okay for 2 grown-ass men to be hanging out with a 14-year-old girl who has said she was sexually abused. And I know there's going to be a lot of Trump supporters out there trying to burn holes through this and say that it's a hoax and a Democratic conspiracy. But we already know that Trump spent Thanksgiving with Epstein in 2017 while he was president. We already know that Trump sent Epstein a birthday letter in the shape of a woman, and he signed his name as the pubic hair. And he talks about some wild shit in there. You kind of got to read between the lines, but go in there and read it. You can see what he's alluding to when he's writing to Epstein. We already know that Epstein email said, yes, Trump knew about the women. I think the words were absolutely when asked by Maxwell in the email. There is a lot of things we have already learned from these emails that were released from the Epstein estate. We've seen a few of the pictures of the 95,000 that the Epstein estate had released. We do know from a congressman that there is photos of sexual activity, but they are going through trying to protect the victims in this before we get to see any of those. And they'll have to be censored, and people will have to be like faces blurred out, and make sure that these victims don't become victims again, because we already know that Trump and his minions have no problem inciting violence, calling for violence. We saw it on January 6th. We saw it when it comes to the 6 lawmakers who decided to remind the military members of their oath to the Constitution. We've seen this with his hatred for Tim Walz and him sending in ICE to attack Black communities using Somalian immigrants who are here legally as a reason to go tear up Black neighborhoods. So we know Trump's people have no problem retaliating. We saw 2 lawmakers in Minnesota attacked. One was killed. Another one had their spouse killed. And Donald Trump didn't even half-mast the flags, but he did for Charlie Kirk. All right. But this is where we're at, to the point where people like Meg Kelly are now trying to normalize this so that it hits less for Trump when he was exposed. And she knew that this was coming out. Behind the scenes, a lot of people had been hearing stories about what was out there. They just weren't investigating or reporting them. And if they don't investigate them, then they don't have to report them, because Meg Kelly could be like, I didn't have a credible source. Yeah, because you didn't look for one. But you already heard the rumor, so you were already playing defense. You're playing defense for a pedophile, which in itself is wild that you're going to try to normalize these behaviors by grown-ass men. But all this article does is just reaffirm the shit we already knew, right? But Trump and them have tried to deny it. You have his mega cult members trying to play defense and saying, oh, those pictures don't prove anything. They just were around each other. Go read it. I suggest everybody go read this. They talked about how they were on each other's planes multiple times, how they hung out with each other at homes and offices, how they were a lot closer than Trump wants people to know. But Trump himself had told us that in the past. Oh, Jeffrey is a good friend. Jeffrey is a good guy. You guys remember these statements? We've all heard this. And now, of course, the White House is scrambling. Tomorrow is when Pam Bondi is supposed to release the Epstein files, but she already threw some shit in the game with that whole ongoing investigation, because you know they're going to do everything they can to make sure that we don't get the files in their entirety. And I'm betting there is going to be big legal fights from what they do not release tomorrow and the games that they're going to play with releasing it. And then we're going to take more time for judges to order. And then they're going to say they understood the order differently than the judge meant, because we've watched this go through with the immigration court. We've watched this go through with other things the judge have ordered this administration to do. They like to play games and play dumb. And yes, these attorneys are playing dumb. Our pedo-in-chief might be as dumb as they get, but these attorneys know exactly what they're doing, and some of them are going to end up disbarred after this is all over for carrying Trump's water. We can go through Trump's old personal attorneys, Giuliani, and other people who have been disbarred. For some reason, they are willing to sacrifice their career for Donald Trump, and it is wild. More's just going to keep coming out. Slowly, we're going to get stuff released from the committees. We're going to probably get more from the Epstein estate. There is attorneys and Jack Smith and other people who know what are in the Epstein files. So when Pam Bondi tries to play her little games, there's people who will know that it's bullshit, so they'll be able to call this out. This is going to be a long fight, in my opinion. Does anybody really believe that tomorrow Pam Bondi is going to hand over 30,000 documents like last time? Because there's hundreds of thousands. So do we think she's going to hand over like 30,000 redacted ones? Or do we think she's actually going to release the whole file from the Epstein of everything the DOJ has? I don't believe it. I don't know if you do. Drop it in the comments. Let me know if you actually think Pam Bondi is going to release everything, because I think we're going to have a long legal battle in front of us. But the one thing I can say is slowly all this information is trickling out and the truth will come. It may take some time, but I truly, for the first time, believe that some people at some point are going to get held accountable for the shit they did to these young ladies, and they all deserve it. Like, you did what you did. You got to own that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think about the New York Times report. Let me know about Pam Bondi, like I said, and let me know what you want to see happen with the release of these reports. All right, everybody. Thank you again for watching. Thank you for all the support we're getting on Facebook. I really appreciate it. Slow ticks on YouTube. I just need you guys to go over there, hit that subscribe. And like I said, my personal account gets binged all the time by Meta, so it's only time until Zuckerberg gets pissed off at this channel and gets some restrictions. So if that happens, you'll still be able to find all the content on YouTube. Again, thank you all for watching. Keep fighting the good fight. One world, one love. Deuces.
Everything's polluted. The environment, the government, the schools, you name it.
This radio person is the whole problem. Are we going to allow this guy to be heard by anyone who can turn a dial?
You out there? You listening?